authorities say officials here to cooperate with investigations in any way they can. Brent Sadler, CNN, Beirut.
Crackdowns in Europe have netted several arrests. In Brussels, Belgium, 2 men believed to have been planning an attack on American interests in Europe were charged with possession of weapons of war.
Now, the 2 also face other counts for a total of 4 each. Authorities say they were members of a radical Muslim group and that they may have been part of a possible terrorist network. We get more on this story now from Diana Muriel.
It was at this apartment building in a prosperous part of Brussels that one of the 2 suspects was arrested on Thursday. Fellow residents say they did not know the man, a Tunisian who was charged on Friday on 1 count of criminal association. The other, a Belgian of North African origin, was arrested at another apartment in this district. He has also been charged with criminal association, as well as attempting to destroy property with explosives, being a member of a private militia, and illegal possession of weapons of war. 1 automatic pistol was recovered by the police, together with ammunition and documentation that points to a planned series of attacks on American interests in Europe.
He is strongly suspected to belong to an extremist Islamic movement, but there's nothing to confirm that they belong to the Bin Laden organization. But that's also not being ruled out.
The documents are currently being analysed by the investigating authorities. No details are yet available. But some European media, including the widely respected French newspaper Le Figaro, have identified the American embassy in Paris as one of the targets. The Belgian prosecutor's office believes the 2 men have links with an unnamed radical Islamic organisation.
At this point, we cannot confirm which country in Europe is being targeted, but the investigation will soon determine that. But there's no doubt the target is American interests.
The arrests in Brussels were part of a joint operation with police in the Netherlands. 4 men were arrested in Rotterdam on Friday. The investigation here into the activities of the 2 suspects continues. Meanwhile, it is widely expected, although not yet officially confirmed by the authorities here, that 2 French magistrates, specialists in terrorism, will come to Brussels on Monday to consult on the case. Diana Muriel, CNN, Brussels.
Iran says it will take steps to seal its long borders with Afghanistan. Both Iran and Pakistan are at risk of receiving a flood of refugees in the event of a United States military strike on Afghanistan. Some Afghans are already anticipating the strike and leaving their homes. Western aid agencies have already pulled out of Kabul, further worsening the situation for displaced Afghans.
Now, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban continue to assert that Osama bin Laden could not have been involved in these attacks. But the exiled Saudi multimillionaire remains a prime suspect, in the words of President Bush. A little earlier, CNN interviewed a biographer of Osama bin Laden. We asked why bin Laden might target the U.S.
He believes that the Muslim world could have surged and become a leading superpower in the aftermath of the collapse of communism, that Islam could have become the leading political ideology of the world, and that westernization, the penetration of the West, the overwhelming influence of the West, of globalization, etc., prevents it from happening.
Well, the United States is, of course, working to build up international support for any possible military action they might take, and they might be using the Gulf War Coalition as a kind of a model.
And now the target of that operation, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, is offering his perspective on the U.S. attacks and possible retaliation. CNN's Rula Amin has more on that.
Iraq's President Saddam Hussein, in a message to the American people, appealed for serenity.
America needs wisdom, not power. It has used power along with the West to the extreme extent, only to find out later that it doesn't achieve what they wanted. Will the rulers of America try wisdom just for once, so that their people can live in security and stability?
The tone of this letter, read on state television, more muted than his first reaction. The day after Tuesday's attacks, he had said, despite the conflicting human feelings, what happened was a result of America's foreign policy, if the attackers were indeed not Americans, he said. And he pointedly did not condemn the attacks. He's still not condemning them. But this time, he called the attacks evil inflicted on America and called for restraint. He also referred to the harassment of Arab Americans and American Muslims in the United States. He said that despite the pain he says Arabs and Muslims have suffered from the United States, he says they never harassed Westerners who walked in the streets of Baghdad and other Arab capitals. In his 12-page letter, Saddam Hussein questioned the motives of any military attack, and although he acknowledged U.S. might, he questioned the use of it.
We ask again, America aiming the fire of its weapons on a specific target, harming it or destroying it with the support of the West, would it solve the problem?
The official newspapers, which had withheld comments since Tuesday, echoed the same line. As for Iraqis, the government wouldn't allow us to interview them. Iraqis blame the United States for their 10 years of suffering under UN sanctions. They also remember the loss of lives they suffered during the Gulf War.
The people we talked to off camera had conflicting feelings. On one hand, they were satisfied to see the American government under attack. On the other hand, they sympathized with the victims. They told us they know very well what's it like to be one.
But mostly, they don't believe Iraq was involved and fear the United States will use the attacks as an excuse to hit Iraq. Many say, with the unlimited support the U.S. has now, the United States won't have to show solid proof if it decides that Iraq has either lent a hand to the attackers or supported other terrorists. And that, again, the Iraqi people will be under the fire of U.S. might. Rula Amin, CNN, Baghdad.
Many people in the Arab world, from political leaders to the ordinary citizens on the streets, have been rocked by Tuesday's tragic events, not only because of the terrorism, the massive loss of life, but also wondering how will it affect them. Well, joining us now to get some reaction from the Arab community is Abdul Bari Atwan. He's the editor-in-chief of the London-based Arab newspaper Al-Quds. Measure for us, if you will, the sentiment in the Arab world, the U.S. president calling on them to take part in a coalition, and the risks.
Well, actually, there are a great deal of confusion in the Arab world. You have the government in one hand and the people on the other hand. And there is a huge gap between governments and people simply because these governments are not elected. There is no democracy. And this gap widened during the intifada of the Palestinians for the last 12 years. Now, the Arabs actually have a great deal of sympathy with the victims of these bombings in Washington and New York. But the problem is they have a lot of buts. You know, these parts is, why, for example, the American don't pay any sympathy when our people are dying, why the American administration didn't intervene to put an end to these sanctions, to atrocities which committed on the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Again, the governments are willing to help the United States. The governments, they don't have any other choices, simply because most of Middle Eastern government, as I said, either financed by United States or actually relying on United States military protection, especially in the Gulf. So these countries are willing to help United States.
All right. But given that gap between the two sides, certainly the Arab world is cognizant that the U.S. Came to the assistance of Kuwait. No, they don't like the sanctions. There's a variety of opinions out there. But as they take part in any coalition here, is it putting anybody at risk?
Oh, yes, definitely. People in the streets actually, okay, and maybe a great deal of them supported what's happened to actually push out Iraqi troops from Kuwait. But the problem, they waited for 10 years hoping that the American will implement exactly the UN Security Council on the Arab-Israeli conflict. So they didn't. This really left a lot of bitterness among the Arab people in the streets there. So now I think there could be a risk. This kind of, government, the Arab government support to United States against a Muslim fellow country, which is extremely destroyed, could create a lot of rifts, could create a lot of destabilization for these moderate regimes. Simply because, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to ask you, I guess kind of a bottom line measure might be this.
Yes.
If someone in the Arab community, in the Gulf or in the Middle East had information about a terror group, we know a lot of this so-called war is really going to be an intelligence war. Do you think they'd come forward with it?
Well, it depends where is this person standing. If he is with the Arab governments, definitely he will supply his governments with this information in order to pass it to the American intelligence. But if this man actually on the streets, he will say, look, why shall I do this? It depends. If he belongs to Islamic minorities, fundamentalist group, definitely he wouldn't be helpful. You know what, I want to warn of something which is extremely important. It depends on how long this war it will take. If it is going to be a prolonged war, definitely it will create a lot of stability in the Middle East. Definitely it will destabilize moderate regimes. It could create could fuel the extremism in the Arab world. And if there are civilian casualties here, it could be a cornerstone. So actually we have to look at the Muslim frustration from the American foreign policies and try to understand this. Without understanding this frustration, it could be really risky for America and for the West. And on top of that, we have a huge Western and American communities in the Middle East. So we have to differentiate between those extremists and ordinary people. And I'm glad Western leaders actually were first to differentiate between extremism and the Arab and Muslim community in the United States and the West, because without that it could reflect badly on those Western people in the height of action or height of civilian casualties. So I hope Western leaders will be very careful.
Abdul-Bari, do you have the impression, the Bush administration says it wants to go ahead with a coalition and bring these people in, but a comment that I've heard from the Arab side is, but how much will you really listen when we tell you, look, you don't understand this, this isn't the way to attack this problem? Do you think the Bush administration will listen, and what will happen if they don't?
The Bush administration made a grievous mistake, a very actually deep mistake, when they didn't listen to the moderate Arabs who were calling them to intervene on the Middle East. They turned back completely to the Middle East. They undermined the frustration, or they misunderstood that, or understood that frustration among the people from the American foreign policies. Now I think it is time to listen. It is time to actually show a lot of sympathy toward the Arab grievances and Arab resentment toward the American policies. If they do that, it could help. But actually with turning their back to these grievances, the deep root of the problems between the Arab and the American, definitely this will play to the hands of the extremists, and definitely it will create the suitable atmosphere for them to cultivate, to mobilize, to recruit more radical elements among the Arabs, frustrated people.
All right. Abdul-Bari Atwan, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks as always for your perspectives in this. Well, India is giving its support to the United States. Indian External Affairs Minister Yashwant Singh says his country will stand with the U.S. in its fight against terrorism.
What India stands for is really the establishment of a concert of democracies against terrorism, unified in purpose and in resolve. Because as President Bush quite rightly has pointed out, that the issue is really addressing ourselves to the system, that mentality which gives birth to these kinds of attitudes. It is not as if an individual has declared war against a great country like United States of America, and United States is in turn declaring war against an individual. It is the system that gives rise to all these tendencies.
That was Yashwant Singh talking to us by video phone. He told CNN New Delhi's government has met with some opposition parties who are supporting the fight against terrorism.
Russia is moving closer to supporting the United States if it chooses military action in response to Tuesday's attacks, and the Kremlin has another message for Washington. We told you so. CNN's Jill Doherty explains.
Russia is telling the West, we tried to tell you. Terror in the United States or terror in Russia. It's all controlled by international terrorist organizations, they say. The #1 criminal suspect in both countries, Osama bin Laden. The FSB, successor to the KGB, tells CNN it knew where bin Laden was hiding before the attacks on the U.S. and informed other special services. He's since changed his location, the FSB says, but is still in Afghanistan. And the agency vows to find out where he is and inform its Western colleagues.
Russia has never tried to kill Osama bin Laden. We usually deal with infiltrating criminals, arresting them, and turning them over to the courts to be punished. That's what I think should be done. However, we have experience where, when a suspect offers arms resistance, in order to avoid casualties, it is possible to kill him.
President Vladimir Putin says he's been warning the West since he took office that there is a worldwide network of fanatical terrorists funded primarily by drug money. They're fighting in Chechnya, he claims, and are responsible for a wave of apartment house bombings that hit Russia 2 years ago. But the West, Moscow says, spent too much time scolding Russia for how it dealt with the threat.
I think now they understand that it is not just our internal issue. It's a problem for the entire international community.
Evil must be punished, says the Russian president.
But we should not become like bandits that act from behind a corner. We should consider our decisions and proceed from true facts.
The attacks in the United States, he says, could be compared in scale and cruelty to what the Nazis were perpetrating. I feel guilty for what has happened, Vladimir Putin says. We spoke so much about this threat, but apparently not enough. Jill Doherty, CNN, Moscow.
Well, the attacks and the ensuing fallout have hit the airline industry especially hard.
You know, the airlines are saying they're losing millions of dollars, and though they're now flying again, all are operating on reduced schedules. As Bruce Francis tells us, it's led to one announcing massive layoffs, and it seems others are certain to follow.
Continental Airlines says it is furloughing 12,000 employees, more than a fifth of its workforce, as it cuts 20% of its schedule.
Continental's just getting early. We're not going to be bankrupt first, I'll tell you that. But we're going to be first to move to prevent it, and I think that's a prudent thing to do.
Northwest is also cutting its schedule by 20%, although it hasn't announced any job reductions. Most airlines are flying reduced schedules right now, but at a heavy loss. The airline industry has been losing as much as $275 million a day since Tuesday's terrorist attacks. And even with most airports now open, the outlook is bleak, with passengers reluctant to fly. Airlines face further constraints as pilots are called up for military reserve. At the same time, the carriers are paying for increased security measures. That's why Bethune and others are calling for a government bailout.
I now, and we all of us, call on the President of the United States and members of our Congress to take immediate action to restore the stability of this vital industry.
A first attempt in Congress to provide $15 billion in assistance has failed. If the money is eventually approved, it may come too late for some airlines. Midway has already folded, and 7 of the top 10 U.S. airlines lost money in the second quarter. Prior to the attacks, the industry was on a course to lose $2 billion this year. Analysts now say that could soar to $10 billion.
The financial situation is such that I really expect 3 to 4 small carriers to file for bankruptcy in the coming weeks, and for the major airlines actually to lay off people. So it's a downward spiral.
Airline chiefs will get their chance to voice their concerns directly to the Bush administration. Next week, they're going to sit down with Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta, potentially on the agenda, beefing up security without scaring away an already nervous public. Bruce Francis, CNN Financial News, New York.
The New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ are scheduled to reopen for business on Monday. Now, tests that were conducted yesterday showed that the data and communication systems are operable, even though the New York Stock Exchange was only about 2 blocks away from the Twin Towers when they were hit. Now, the market's set to reopen 9:30 Monday morning. Members of the New York City Police and Fire Departments, Emergency Medical Service, and others are going to be there. They're going to be ringing the opening bell as one way of honoring those who lost their lives Tuesday.
And the attacks on the World Trade Center left thousands of families with more questions than answers, more worries than certainties. And as CNN's Candy Crowley learned, both the pain and the hope come from not knowing.
Yes, Dan? Yes, this is David Vincent.
He's an Eastman Kodak executive from Webster, New York. A man with a problem to solve, a man on a mission.
How is it being set up so that I can make the best use of my time? Because you're working a timeline here. You have to get to your daughter as fast as you can.
Melissa is missing. She's a technology recruiter at Alliance Consulting.
But we know that that's 102nd floor of Tower 1.
The enormity of what's happened in David Vincent's life shows on his face, but does not slow his step.
Please take a picture. Please focus on the picture. To get her face out there so that
working on 3 hours sleep and a couple of crackers, he protects his fondest hopes, battles his worst fears, and sometimes loses.
I don't have any video of her. To be honest with you, Melissa didn't like to be videoed. She used to holler at me every time I did. I'd give anything to have her holler at me right now.
I'd give anything, he says, to have her holler at me right now. It's a rare lapse. Mostly, there is a desperate monotony to his mission.
I know she made a 911 call at 9:02:07.
It's all that David Vincent knows about what happened to his eldest daughter. It's enough to hang hope on.
When we went back to the cell phone provider, the only thing that we had that they could tell us is that there was a 911 call made from that cell phone at 9:02, which was some 17 minutes after the jet had piled into the thing.
9:02:07. He tells it to everyone he talks to. He clings to it for dear life, because of course it is.
I need to know where she was when she made that call, because that will tell me whether she was downstairs just getting off the path and maybe in a void someplace downstairs, or whether I have to understand that she was upstairs on 102 and have to wonder whether she was able to get out or not able to get out.
By evening, David Vincent has pretty much worn out the corner of 26th and Lexington, and his cell battery is fading, so he moves on. Craig Spitzer is CEO of Alliance. 7 employees, everyone thought to be in the building that morning, are missing. He cannot, will not, bring himself to believe they're gone.
I'm not going to say that to you right now.
You can't?
No, and I won't. And I won't for myself, and I won't for the people in there.
In there is a room full of people who have loved someone too long to give up so soon, and what's left after hope is unthinkable. It is why they agreed to expose this rawest of human times to the glare of the camera lens, because maybe somebody out there has information about Roland, something that will keep his brother moving.
I go to sleep with hope, I wake up with none.
And perhaps somebody saw Eric in a stairwell racing to safety.
We don't know. Maybe he's out there someplace, got hit on the head, and he doesn't know who he is. You know, maybe he's unconscious and he didn't have any identification on him.
And as it turns out, nobody can say for sure that Melissa was in the office for that 8:30 meeting.
I have to tell you, Craig, that's the best news that I could possibly hear, because what you're telling me is you can't confirm Melissa in that office space, and that's what I had to know. Yeah. That's what keeps me going.
So if you know anything about Melissa, call her father. He'd give anything to hear her holler at him again. Candy Crowley, CNN, New York.
People in the United States and around the world continue to mourn the loss of those killed in Tuesday's terrorist attacks. In New York, thousands of people are still buried in what was the Twin Towers. Some of them spent their final moments telling family and friends goodbye. Here is one such story from Austin, Texas. We apologize. People in the United States and around the world continue to mourn the loss of those killed in Tuesday's terrorist attacks. In New York, thousands of people are still buried in what was the Twin Towers. Here is one such story from Austin, Texas.
My brother was probably the kindest, nicest person I ever knew. He was the best friend I ever had. The moment that the plane crashed into the building, he left me a message.
Hi, Casey, it's Chad. Something horrible is happening here. It sounds like an earthquake or typhoon, but everything's on fire. Casey, I know I'm about to die. Please tell Mom I love her dearly, and I love you and Jody too. Please forgive me for everything I've ever done to hurt you. I didn't think about the good times.
What happened when somebody bombed the World Trade Center? They didn't just bomb a building. They touched human lives, and he was a part of my life. And he was someone that I loved so much. And I know he loved me too. I feel like someone took something from me that never should have been taken from me, ever.
Nearly 5,000 people are believed to be still missing in New York as search and rescue efforts are ongoing. For friends and relatives looking for their loved ones, the focus of their search has been on the Manhattan Armory, where details of the missing are being registered. Michael Oakwood joins us now from there with the latest. Michael.
Relitza, you know, there's a sense of complete weariness and a sense of exhaustion that has gripped this city. So many people have shed so many tears. And in the coming days, no doubt, you will start hearing words and phrases that are used so often at times like this that they ring in your ears like cliches. Resolution, moving forward, a return to normalcy. But the fact is, for so many, many people, those friends and family members connected to those who were buried under the ash and rubble of the World Trade Center, they will not be returning to normalcy. They try to find some kind of resolution here at the Armory on Lexington Avenue and 26th Street. Here is the emotional ground zero. They essentially fill out a 7-page form where they are supposed to supply identifiable traits of their loved ones, everything from recognizable scars to the kind of nail polish they like to wear. Then they're either put on the list of bodies that were taken to the hospital or officially entered on the list of the missing. Since Thursday, 3,100 people have filed past these doors. Yesterday, the New York City Health Department announced the fact that a medical lab company by the name of LabCorp is offering free DNA collections, which could ultimately help rescue workers identify the bodies. They are asked to provide toothbrushes, hairbrushes, samples of saliva from the closest blood relatives, anything that might have been used exclusively by that person who is missing that might be able to help them connect something and therefore identify these people. Early last night, or late last night I should say, I spoke to a young woman whose godmother is missing.
This is the only way that they can identify, so we've come in with hairbrushes, toothbrushes. Her brother took a saliva sample for DNA, and everyone's willing to do anything, but it's just a matter of waiting.
While so many of us wonder what's next, obviously there are a few people out there who are still very much focused on perhaps what was. Relitza?
Michael, thank you. And we will have more of CNN's continuing coverage of America's new war at the top of the hour. For now, we leave you with images of heartbreak, healing, and hope. I'm Relitza Vasilova.
And I'm Jim Clancy.